Hello everyone and welcome to the 55th International Conference of Horse Racing Authorities, organised by the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities, the IFHA, which is being held virtually for the second consecutive year. A warm thank you as well to the Japan Racing Association, which is the official partner of this year's conference. As the world begins to emerge out of the pandemic, it is time to start to look ahead, with a focus on global racing's evolution and future challenges, but not before reflecting on the past. And we begin on a poignant note as we honour the retirement of Louis Romanet after a distinguished career and dedicated service of almost 3 decades as chairman of the IFHA. And we are delighted that Winfried Engelbrecht-Bresges has been elected to serve as the second chair in the IFHA's history. Racing jurisdictions around the world have shown great fortitude and tremendous determination to persevere through the pandemic, but it remains vital that we acknowledge an awareness of challenges that the sport of horse racing faces now and beyond. Therefore, this conference features a keynote address from Winfried Engelbrecht-Bresges, chair of the IFHA, and 3 panels that look towards racing's future. Digitalisation and media, including how racing must adapt and integrate new technologies and approaches to connecting with the next generation of fans. Equine Welfare, with a particular focus on the need for comprehensive traceability as well as retirement systems and pathways. Climate change and sustainability, with a focus on the threat posed by climate change to all industries, including racing and sport, and the expected opportunities and challenges to the operations of racing and breeding in achieving net zero emission. We hope that you find each of the panels engaging, informative and thought-provoking, and that at the end of this conference there'll be a clearer picture of both challenges and solutions for the sport of horse racing.
Dear members, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address you today as chair of the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities and to open the 55th International Conference. I would like to begin by acknowledging the outstanding contribution of our outgoing chairman, Louis Romanet, over many years. Under Louis' leadership, the Federation has made significant progress in achieving its mission as a vehicle for harnessing our collective efforts for the benefit of the future development and prosperity of thoroughbred racing. Louis has made a most remarkable contribution which no one could ever emulate. I would also like to congratulate Horacio Esposito, Jim Galliano, Masayuki Goto and Brian Kavanagh on their appointment as vice chairs of the Federation. Today, in the opening the 55th conference, amidst what are extremely challenging times for our sport, I would like to share with you some key aspects of the future vision and strategy for the Federation. Through the Federation's recent governance review, the purpose of the Federation and its key objectives have been set and strongly endorsed by the General Assembly. The purpose of the Federation is to be the global leader for the international sport of thoroughbred racing. In being the global leader, the Federation seeks to promote all facets of the worldwide sport of thoroughbred racing, to protect the welfare of equine and human athletes, and to protect and grow its global social and economic significance for current and future generations. The objectives of the federations are set out on this slide for your reference. To translate these objectives into practical reality, we have identified key strategic areas of focus and outcomes which we propose for the next 3 years. This process has seen a global engagement exercise involving all regions and which will be completed by December 2021. The Federation's key strategic areas of focus for the next 3 years are set out on this slide. I will shortly focus on 3 of these areas. They are: first, integrity; second, commercial and marketing; and thirdly, climate change and sustainability. The Federation's strategic planning takes place in the context of the greatest global public health crisis in the last 100 years. The COVID pandemic has impacted our daily lives in every aspect. It has put the sustainability of the industry of horse racing and breeding to the most challenging tests ever. The consequences and impact of the pandemic are still emerging, and they will take time to fully unfold. But we already know the impacts of the pandemic will require us to holistically review how we operate and will require us to adapt to a new normal. By adapting, we will sustain our industry in general and support those who are most impacted and maintain our global reach and focus. It's clear that consumer behavior has undergone significant changes as a result of the pandemic, including due to the restriction on physical movement and resulting increased use of technology for communication, media consumption, and entertainment. However, despite the massive challenge we face as a result of the global pandemic, the resilience of our industry has shown to adapt is remarkable and has given us many new opportunities. Simultaneously, we will face, for the foreseeable future, another major macro challenge with the impact of climate change on our industry. According to the International Panel on Climate Change, in its sixth assessment report, released in August this year, rising global temperatures are already increasing the frequency and severity of extreme weather events. Irreversible damage will be done unless concerted global efforts are made to reduce emissions. Global warming is creating significant challenges to horse and jockey welfare. And there is the real threat of equine diseases extending into different regions, as well as other challenges to the industry supply chain and operations. Time is of essence. As the Oliver Wyman Forum put it recently, the race is on to net zero. We will execute on our strategic plan via our new form of working together, with a global, modernized governance and operating model. The Federation has now established a globally integrated executive office under the leadership of the Executive Director Andrew Harding, with 3 directors. Andrew Chesser of the US Jockey Club, Henri Pourret of France Galop, and James Ogilvie of the Hong Kong Jockey Club. The Executive Office will operate virtually from Australia, Hong Kong, the United States, and last not least, Paris, as home of the Federation. This Executive Office will work very closely with the new Management Board, comprising of the Chair and the 4 Vice Chairs from all regions, which will meet virtually on a regular basis. It's important to pay special thanks to all of the organizations, including the US Jockey Club, France Galop, the Japan Racing Association, and the Hong Kong Jockey Club, which have provided significant additional resources to support the Executive Office and business as usual work of the Federation, as well as our strategic partner Longines, with whom we enjoy a fruitful and mutually beneficial relationship. Complementing our new globally integrated Executive Office and Management Board and our extensive expert committee are the new Finance and Governance Committee. The Finance Committee will be chaired by Executive Council member from Canada, Jim Lawson, CEO of the Woodbine Entertainment Group, and will play a critically important role in the Federation's budgeting process and the general oversight of the Federation's finances during what will be a very busy period of activity. The Governance Committee, to be chaired by Julie Harrington, CEO of British Horse Racing Authority, will ensure the ongoing focus on enhancing and improving the governance of the Federation, which is essential as we continue to expand our output, impact, and brand. I would now like to turn and highlight, in particular, 3 key strategic areas of focus, which will be fundamental to the Federation in the years ahead. Integrity is a cornerstone of our sport and the basis of everything that we do. Integrity is essential to the health and prosperity of the entire equine value chain, and it's non-negotiable. non-negotiable at every link. As at heart, racing is the key as a selection process for breeding, which is, in many countries, the foundation and the key economic value creator. The Federation must step up its effort to assist our racing authorities to conduct all horse races on a level playing field. Only where this occurs, there can be the true contest and the best equine athlete selected for future breeding. And can the interests of breeders, owners, trainers, jockeys and punters to be protected? The Federation will therefore adopt a relentless focus on the integrity of racing. This approach will leverage the expertise of our leading racing chemists and laboratories and regulatory veterinarians, as well as other regulatory officials, to ensure that existing prohibited substance and practice policy is of the highest standard and emerging drugs are identified and tested. The Federation has been ahead of the curve in anticipating the threat of gene doping. This focus will continue. Our team will engage in concerted work to raise the general awareness of the risks of gene doping and to ensure our technical teams and regulatory structures and systems are educated and equipped to aggressively and comprehensively tackle this threat. Of course, gene doping is a fundamental threat to the breeding industry. And there must be a complete collaboration between the breeding industry, the stud books, and the racing authorities on this issue. The source of illegal betting must also be addressed and built into the integrity responses of our racing authorities. Again, we must harness the work and expertise of our members to guide our racing authorities and other regulators in good practice approaches to combating illegal betting, promoting legal and regulated wagering, and protecting the integrity of our sport. Finally, the Federation must continue to examine further avenues to support the quality of our racing, and therefore of the future breeding industry, including through ensuring the highest standards of performance assessment and quality controls are in place for all racing around the world. Even despite the travel restrictions of the pandemic, the process of globalization is accelerating, facilitated by advancements in technology and rapid digitalisation. Dynamic changes in the information and communications technology, social media, digital platforms, consumer preferences and habits, wagering technology and wagering products such as gambling on esports are occurring in real time. In addition, potentially game-changing innovations in blockchain, crypto and digital currencies, as well payment platforms are here and becoming increasingly mainstream. In this context, on the commercial front, the Federation will bring our leading commercial minds together in a new committee, to be chaired by the CEO of France Gallo, Olivier Deloy. The Federation's Commercial and Marketing Committee will examine opportunities to maximize growth and innovation within the Federation and among our members. Across marketing and branding, intellectual property development, and media or wagering. This work will lift our focus on the globalization of racing as sports entertainment to another level. The Federation will identify ideas and strategies to create favorable conditions for racing operators, encouraging the optimization of online international wagering and promoting racing as sports entertainment. There will be a particular emphasis on driving growth through simulcast, with a focus on commingling, especially with whirlpools, which has already provided significant revenues for its participant and presented an unprecedented growth opportunity for our sport. To support the further development of whirlpools and commingling, we should develop a new racing wagering information and transaction integrity protocol, and the committee will look closely at this and other conditions necessary for the broader global simulcast. The committee will also work to identify and develop value for the Federation through new intellectual properties, in addition to the Longines World's Best Racehorse, World's Best Jockey, and World's Best Race. We shall further explore new sponsorship opportunities, building on our very successful relationships with Longines and the JRA. By supporting the identification of new and larger revenue streams for the racing industry, this will help us as a federation to fund our significantly increased activities in the areas including integrity measures, strategic cooperation and collaboration, and guidance, including through our highly effective relationship with the International Equestrian Federation in the form of the International Horse Sports Confederation, and the funding of the IHC collaboration agreement with the OIE, and environmental, social, and horse and human welfare measures. This links to our third area of focus, being climate change and sustainability, covering environmental, social, and corporate governance. It's pertinent that we consider the impact of racing and its supporting industry in our environment and our local and global communities. Climate change is a topic that is yet to be properly examined in a holistic way by the racing industry. The time has now come for racing to fully commit to addressing the challenge of climate change. We are dedicated to seeing that the Federation takes a lead in a global discussion and exploration how our industry can confront the threat of climate change, and how our members can plan to adapt their operations and our sport to work together towards net zero carbon emission. Like other major industries and sport, this is an obligation and not a choice. Unique in the complexity of our structure and value chain components, the thoroughbred racing and breeding are both an elite sport and a significant contributor to the agricultural sector. We have major land holdings in breeding farms, training facilities, and racecourses. We have wagering and digital media businesses, and totally they create vast direct and indirect employment. This structure and the diverse range of functions mean that our industry response to climate change will be multifaceted. The Federation will establish a dedicated committee on climate change and sustainability. Necessarily, we will need to draw not only upon the skills of our administrators, but also on the advice and input of external experts. Such work will be informed by a detailed understanding of how our sport and operations are organized and the impact of our operations on the environment. We must anticipate threats to our membership from climate change and changes in government policies and emission targets on their racing operations and find effective solutions. We will need to examine all aspects which impact upon the environmental sustainability of our industry, including but not limited to water usage and waste production and reduction. We must also prepare for appropriate yet demanding reporting obligation in respect to environmental impacts. We are confident that racing as a major global sport can demonstrate leadership on climate change, just as we have in other areas, such as commercial development and integrity approaches. The societies in which we live are evolving, and attitudes towards matters including animal and human welfare and well-being are evolving too. Protection of the welfare of animals, whether in the context of agricultural production, process, or equine athletes for sport, must be respected and embraced. In addition, the importance of mental and psychological health and well-being of people, as well as diversity and inclusion, is rightly taking greater prominence, and this trend will continue. In an era of changing social attitudes toward animal welfare, it is vital that we demonstrate our commitment to the welfare of horses at every stage of their lives. Whilst acknowledging some jurisdictional challenges of some of our authorities, both pre- and post-racing, the Federation must acknowledge our responsibility to do everything within our power to ensure our horses are protected and cared for. The Federation, through the Horse Welfare Committee and with great assistance from international stud book and breeding professionals, will develop and promote minimum standards for breeding welfare. We will maintain a very active examination of the threats of the equine welfare during racing, including those arising from the use of prohibited substances and medications and other practices. Finally, it is critical that our members have in place full traceability systems and viable post-racing career pathways, and this will, in conjunction with key partners, be a key plank of the Federation's future focus for horse welfare. The welfare of our human athletes is equally important if racing is to remain a viable pathway for the next generation of jockeys, trainers, stable staff and others. Protecting their physical and mental health requires a holistic approach, and the Federation will work with experts to drive the industry effort on this front. To support the achievement of our strategic goals, we have to strengthen our governance and put in place appropriate and comprehensive oversight committees to support the Executive Council. It's important that we remain open and energized to continually improve our governance systems, and this will continue as a key priority. To complement the modernized governance framework of the Federation, we are blessed with some of the top minds in sports administration, commercial development, veterinary medicine, sports integrity, and animal welfare amongst our ranks. The Federation has all the resources and skills we need to adapt to a changing global landscape and to navigate the major macro changes. The Federation will also ensure comprehensive communication with its members and stakeholders in respect of our decisions and positions on key issues, and transparent reporting on our operations and activities. What we have examined today are a few highlights of what is an ambitious plan for the work of the Federation. Personally, I'm humbled to have the opportunity to lead the Federation at this critical juncture and to guide an extremely experienced and talented team to develop and execute strategies to address unique and major challenges to our sport. I now turn to the second part of today's conference, during which we are fortunate to have 4 outstanding individuals who will be introduced by our moderator, Richie Persat, later. Our speakers will explore further some issues I've touched on just now, including climate change and sustainability, digitalization and media, and last not least, equine welfare. Once again, I would like to congratulate our outgoing chairman, Louis Romanet, for his remarkable contribution to the Federation across his working life. It's a privilege to commence my term as second chair in the Federation history, and I'm energized as a prospect of working with our members and stakeholders to build on the Federation's sound foundation.
Well, we know that during the global pandemic, the sport of horse racing has shown remarkable resilience, but now we must look ahead to the future. And today we're having a conversation about digitalisation and media and how racing must adapt and integrate new technologies and approaches to connecting with the next generation of fans, from broadcast to the creation of digital merchandise. And with that in mind, we'd like to welcome Michael Mulvihill, Fox Sports Executive Vice President, Head of Strategy and Analytics. And Michael, we're going to kick off today with a question about your role at Fox Sports and what trends you've seen in sport overall. How has the pandemic spurred on new technologies and approaches for the industry?
In horse racing on American television over the last couple of years is just that there's been a dramatic expansion in the number of hours of racing that is available to the American audience. And, candidly, most of that has come from Fox Sports and from our relationship with the New York Racing Association. Some of you will remember that almost a decade ago, McKinsey & Company did a very comprehensive review of the business of horse racing in the US, and one of their primary recommendations was that the sport needed more hours of national television coverage, and we, through our partnership, have really been able to meet that need. We now do about 800 hours a year of national TV coverage. And I think there's been a very clear correlation between the expansion of our relationship with NYRA and the growth of handle for the NYRA tracks. And I know we'll talk about that in a little more detail later. As far as the pandemic itself, I think what we've seen industry-wide is an acceleration of what we call at-home productions, events that are not necessarily being produced entirely on site. We now do a majority of our live event productions here on the Fox lot in Los Angeles. We have announcers here in this building calling events in real time that might be happening thousands of miles away. That's been a really prevalent trend across the business, but I will tell you that in horse racing specifically, we haven't gone to at-home productions. We continue to produce all of our NYRA content on site every day. And I think it really enhances the production. I think it helps give us what I like to believe is the best day in, day out product in horse racing.
Well, let's move the conversation on now to the New York Racing Association. And Fox Sports have been partners for several years now in producing content for NYRA's racing at Belmont Park in Saratoga, including an expansion of the partnership announced in March of this year. For our audience, can you describe the relationship, the content it produces, and its aims in digitally showcasing horse racing? And how did the pandemic evolve the partnership's production and distribution?
Our relationship with NYRA, it began in 2016, and it started as about 80 hours of content from Saratoga, which we believe is the premier meet in North America. The content has now evolved to be about 10 times that number of hours. And not only have we expanded the relationship several times over, just in terms of hours of programming, but we've deepened our relationship, which is one of the most positive and friendliest content relationships that we have. We've extended the content side of the NYRA relationship now through 2030, which is a fairly long-term deal. And we've also exercised an option that we've held for several years to become a 25% equity partner in the ADW platform NYRA Bets, which we've grown several times over the last several years. So we now own a quarter of NYRA Bets. We have an option to acquire another 24.9%. So we'll be almost 50-50 partners. And I like to believe that we'll exercise that option in the relatively near future. I think it's that equity piece specifically that makes our relationship unique. Traditionally, the relationship between media and horse racing is just a very traditional content and advertising relationship. You pay a rights fee for the content, you produce it as well as you can, you sell advertising against the viewership of that content, and that's as far as it goes. Now that we have the stake that we have in NYRA Bets, it really incentivizes us to promote the wagering, to assist in the mainstreaming of wagering in the US, and to try to grow the asset value of NYRA Bets, which, without revealing too much, we've grown it several times over already, and I think we have a lot more ceiling ahead of us. As far as how the pandemic evolved our production and distribution, I think it's very well known that for a period of several months last year, sports in the US and really worldwide had come to an almost complete standstill, except for horse racing, because the horses needed to continue to be trained and attended to. It wasn't that much more of a leap to go ahead and continue the racing as well and conduct wagering, but not do it in front of a live audience. So racing was able to continue in the US at a time when almost nothing else was being staged. And so because there was such an absence of live sports, we were able to elevate our content from Belmont and Saratoga from a network called Fox Sports 2, which is in about 50 million homes, to Fox Sports 1, which at that time was in closer to 80 million homes. And that elevation was really, really productive. Our viewership went up by over 100%. Wagering was way up during the pandemic. I think that, it's sort of delicate to talk about taking advantage of that situation because it's obviously a worldwide challenge. But I think that the reality is that as a business, horse racing in the US was able to take advantage of the circumstances and enjoy some growth. NYRA definitely enjoyed some growth, and we've been able to continue that through to 2021 as the pandemic has abated a little bit.
Mike, can I just ask, do you have a personal relationship with horse racing yourself? And is that one of the reasons that you wanted to help make this partnership a reality?
Yeah, Rishi, I absolutely do. I appreciate you asking that question, actually. I do have a really strong passion and affinity for racing. I've been a fan for many years prior to initiating our relationship with NYRA. I have a family connection to the business. My brother Jim has worked in American racing basically for his whole career with stops at the NTRA and Churchill Downs. He now runs the Colorado Horsemen's Association. So I'd like to think we have a real appreciation for the sport and a passion for it. It's a little bit of I certainly have a personal stake in seeing this relationship become successful. The job that I have right now, I spend most of my time on the NFL, which is by far the most popular sport in America, college football, which is arguably the second most popular sport, and horse racing. So, those are my priorities. I feel like those are the three things where I'm spending the bulk of my time. I'm very much invested in it. And I think the results so far have been really positive. And as I say, I think we can do a lot more in the future.
Well, let's talk about wagering, which has been the driving economic metric for horse racing worldwide, but especially in the United States. At the conclusion of its Saratoga meet, NYRA revealed a record all sources handle of over $815 million. Now, do you mind sharing how wagering is weaved into production, and why is that such a critical component?
We are really proud of that Saratoga handle figure. You mentioned 815 million. Not only is that a record, but it shatters the previous record by about $100 million. So it was an emphatic breaking of that record. And from the time that we initiated this content 5 years ago, our intent was to do a daily production that was really specifically targeted at day in, day out horse players and people who put a significant amount of money through the windows and are the lifeblood of this business. I think if you look at horse racing on American TV, there's the Triple Crown and the Breeders' Cup, which are held by NBC, and they do a really beautiful job producing those events for a general sports viewership. There's TVG, which is producing for a day in, day out horse playing audience, but they're producing a lot of tracks. And so they don't get to spend a lot of time on one track in particular. And what we wanted to do was carve out sort of an in-between path where we could focus on just one track, one circuit, and really devote the time and attention that we felt that the NYRA tracks deserved, but also elevate the production value a little bit, be on site every day, cover the social scene, cover the game generally, and try to be something of a hybrid between that NBC presentation for the general audience and the TVG presentation for a dedicated horse playing audience. But as I say, a presentation that's covering multiple tracks every day. We very much wanted to be open in encouraging people to play the game, to open a NYRA Bets account, to engage in handicapping. We think it's a really fun activity, obviously, when it's participated in responsibly. And I really think, at the risk of overstating it, I think that the way we produce our shows is something of a blueprint for the future of sports television in the US. I think, as everybody in this meeting knows, the Supreme Court opened the door for states to legalize sports wagering in the US on a state-by-state basis a few years ago. A number of states have taken that step, and many more obviously to come. And the way that we produce events in the future will have to take wagering into account. We're going to have to incorporate that wagering element into the way that we produce sports. And I think our NYRA broadcasts are already far ahead. I like to believe that we're setting a pretty good example for incorporating wagering, recognizing that wagering is an important part of the event, but also still primarily covering it as a sports event first, right? We don't want to cover it as a wagering event first, but as a sports event that happens to have legal wagering as an important component. And I think 10 years from now, that's how all of American sports is going to be presented on TV.
And Mike, I'd also like to ask, for Fox Sports, how significant is betting to the company's business and its brand? And where does horse racing fit into the overall gaming strategy?
Rishi, what I would say is that wagering is as important to our strategy and our evolution as any component of our business. I mean, what we say all the time is that Fox Sports is evolving from being purely a media content company into being a content and gaming company. Every traditional media company in the US is obviously evolving in some way, but the way that most of those companies are evolving is from being a linear television distribution service to going direct to consumer and developing their streaming business. That's what's happening at Disney. That's what's happening at Comcast. And obviously the investing community is responding really favorably to that transformation, but we're taking a different approach. Our approach is that we want to be the leaders in news and premium sports on traditional linear television, and we want to evolve our business to be the most aggressive media company at taking advantage of this new wagering opportunity. Right now, we are the only media company in the US that is actively taking bets in 4 different businesses. We have a sports betting business called Fox Bet. We obviously have our horse racing business with Naira and our equity interest in Naira Bets. We are involved in online poker and also in online casino gaming, which are, I think, underappreciated as revenue generators. So we have 4 bet-taking businesses. We clearly see this as kind of the next step in the evolution of our company. And I think horse racing is a really important part of that because it is already legal in so many states. We are only taking bets on sports in 5 states, but through our Naira relationship, we're taking bets on horse racing in, I think, 30 states. So that allows us to get a foot in the door in so many more states, and eventually the sports betting piece will catch up. So I think horse racing is extremely important to us, not just in terms of the handle that it generates and the revenue that we earn from that, but in the way that it gets us into a great number of states where we eventually want to be participating in sports betting as well.
Well, with sports betting becoming an increasingly available option in many states in America, do you see this moment being an opportunity for horse racing to introduce itself to a wagering public not yet familiar with racing?
I do, and I think it's already happening. I think it's reflected in those Saratoga figures that we talked about earlier. I mean, I think that indicates that there is a rediscovery of horse racing happening in the US. I think the fact that we've had 2 Triple Crown winners within the last decade helps. I think the opportunity that racing was able to take advantage of during the peak of the pandemic obviously helps. And I think racing in some ways has been repositioned as a great social activity and just as a great day out. You know, my own opinion is that it's very difficult to market the horses themselves because they just don't run that often. It's difficult to market the jockeys because just the act of riding a racehorse is something that most American sports fans aren't personally familiar with. But what's easy to market is the idea of just a great day out, being in the sunshine, seeing these beautiful animals race, placing a wager, maybe having a beverage, and just enjoying the day out with friends. And I think we've been marketing that more and more aggressively. We're certainly not alone in that. I think that's the way that NBC presents the Derby and the Triple Crown. And it's really working. So it's a pivotal moment for racing. I think the industry in the US has capitalized on it. And I think the next step in that transformation is going to be the introduction of IFHA and letting the public know that there are some credible and meaningful safeguards around safety and integrity, so that when they do come to the track to enjoy that day out, they know that the horses are being well cared for. They know that the riders are well cared for. They know that their wagering is being conducted on an event that's held at the highest possible level of integrity. And if you combine all those things, the safety and integrity, the emphasis on racing as a fun social activity, the recent Triple Crown winners, and the momentum that we have coming out of the pandemic, it really is a once in a generation opportunity for horse racing. I hope the industry is going to be able to take advantage. And I think the indication so far is that we are taking advantage.
And Mike, the final question I'd like to ask you is, what new strategies and synergies do you anticipate the sporting and wagering industries exploring in order to meet the evolving needs of its customers?
I think 2 things come to mind for me. One is the opportunity to cross-sell with sports betting and to try to get the racing better to also become a sports bettor, and vice versa. A line that we use frequently in our company is that not every sports bettor is going to become an active bettor on horse racing, but every horse racing bettor is probably going to be an active bettor in sports wagering. So we feel like we have that market of horse players that we can potentially bring over to our Fox Bet product as it gets into more and more states. And so that cross-selling opportunity is going to be really important. And then secondly, and I obviously have a biased opinion when it comes to this, but I think the need to create more exposure on traditional TV is really acute, and the opportunity there is tremendous. And it's a little bit ironic that because companies like Disney and Comcast are developing their streaming businesses, a lot more sports in the US are moving from traditional television to direct-to-consumer platforms. I think what's happening in horse racing is just the opposite. Horse racing has been sending their simulcast signals out direct to consumer on the internet for a number of years. And those signals are now migrating back to traditional TV, with our NYRA relationship probably leading the way in that area. And we're having a lot of success. And I think what we're finding in talking to other tracks that want to be part of our shows and want to be part of our content, there's a recognition in horse racing that you're much better off on traditional TV than you are on an over-the-top direct-to-consumer platform. So while most of the business is going this way, horse racing is coming back to traditional TV, and it's working. And I think in time, more and more sports are going to realize that they need that broad-based exposure that traditional national TV provides. But for the moment, because the business in general is going this way, it creates a void that horse racing can step into. And that's partly what allows us to devote so many hours of content to horse racing. And as I say, that formula is working out really well.
Well, Mike, thank you very much for joining us to have this conversation and for your insights. And we hope that a lot of people in the racing industry find it extremely useful.
Thanks again, Rishi, and thank you everybody for giving me a little bit of time to speak with you today. We are so proud of the relationship that we have with the New York Racing Association. We're so proud of the opportunities that we've had to showcase some of the great events in racing from all over the world. And if there's a thought that I can leave all of you with, it's that we would love to further the presence that we have in international racing. I really want Fox Sports and our networks to be the American home for the great events in racing around the world. We've had great experiences with the Dubai World Cup, with the Saudi Cup, and we want to look for ways to bring more of that content to our networks. So I encourage any of you who can help us develop that content and bring more of the world's great racing to Fox to connect with me, and let's find a way to do business together and just keep growing racing in the United States. I think we're really on our way.
Well, equine welfare is a subject that has been hot on the lips of racing around the world. And it seems as if each year we say the words, equine welfare is now more important than ever. Two people who know something about it, two people who've been involved with equine welfare for a very long time. Delighted to welcome Jamie Steer, Executive General Manager, Integrity Services, Racing Victoria, and Chairman of the IFHA's Horse Welfare Committee, and Di Arbuthnot, Chief Executive, Retraining of Racehorses and the IFAR, International Forum for the Aftercare of Horses Chair. Jamie and Di, you heard what I said about how important equine welfare seems to be, and the increasing importance, seemingly, of equine welfare. I thought the best place to start is perhaps with the idea that horse racing is, as an industry, is indebted, obviously, to the athletes, the equine athletes. And therefore, we know it's imperative that collectively all racehorses are cared for and protected. For you, Jamie, I'll start with you. Why is it so vital that the sport do collectively together to ensure the highest standards of welfare for horses before, during, and after their racing career?
Well, Rishi, I think everyone needs to acknowledge that the horse is central to racing, and I think that's well understood and well accepted. So if we start with that premise, firstly, the horse deserves to have good welfare, deserves to be cared for appropriately, throughout its life, not only during racing, but throughout its life. And I mean, for racing to prosper and be sustainable, it's imperative that the horse is seen by all, not just racing people, but by all, to be appropriately cared for.
Di, I guess there's a moral case here as well as a business sense. The fact that equine athletes provide so much entertainment, and in a business model, you care for everyone in that business, but also just on a human level, we should care for all creatures.
Well, absolutely. And I think we live in a very different world, Rishi, now, where people want to know where things come from, how they're made, and how they're produced. And surely the same standards should apply to horse welfare going forward. That we must be able to get, and we must be able to put that message across that we care for these horses and look after their welfare from their birth right the way through their lives.
Without question. Jamie, if I'll just ask you a little bit about the IFHA Horse Welfare Committee, a group that you chair, recently produced guidance on standards for the care and welfare of horses at different times of their life. Can you expand a bit about the guidelines outlined in that IFHA minimum horse welfare standards?
As you say, Rishi, they're guidelines, and you also mentioned the word minimum. So our committee is made up of international people that represent horse racing across the globe, and very experienced people who are passionate about the care of the horses. So collectively, we put together this set of guidelines, which are based upon the New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing Welfare Assessment Guidelines, which were produced with the great assistance of Emeritus Professor David Mellor. So I think it's important that we understand that these guidelines are set at a level which we believe achievable and attainable across all the IFHA member countries, and we challenge people to actually exceed them. What they do is set out a definition of horse welfare, which isn't always easy to find anywhere, and we've defined welfare as being the physical and mental state of a horse in relation to the conditions in which it lives and dies. So that if that's welfare, we then look at what is good welfare. And good welfare means that a horse is healthy, it's comfortable, it's well nourished, it feels safe in its environment, it's not suffering from pain or fear or distress, and that it's important that it's got all the attributes afforded to it that enable it to have a good mental and physical state. So basically, overall, a life worth living.
Absolutely. Di, in your role involved with Britain's horse racing's official charity for the welfare of horses who've retired from racing, can you detail how the ROR is able to promote the versatility and indeed the adaptability of racehorses for other activities equestrian once they've retired from racing?
Thank you, Richie. Yes, I think we realised in those very early days that, there was always going to be a supply of racehorses and we had to keep up demand. So we looked at ways of working with the equestrian world and obviously trying to promote it within our own industry. We didn't have the facilities to have a situation where everything went into a field and did nothing. We had to create a demand. So these horses had a life after racing. Sometimes they finish racing at 2 years old. There's an awful lot of their lives left then for it to be taken care of. So it was that made us go in that direction. And it has been a huge success going forward. But I mean, we can never rest on our laurels. There's always far more to do. But it has been a way of giving the horse a life at any sort of level so that, we have a safety net, obviously, for the very few that do slip through the net. But the majority are having an active life, and that's what's important.
Jamie, just going back to what you were saying a few moments ago, talking about the welfare standards that you've envisioned to complement the recent reforms. And traceability of horses is obviously a key element of it all, talking about horses through the foal stage, the retirement and beyond. Why do you think is traceability such an important factor
at all points for a racehorse? And what actions are typically undertaken by, say, an IFHA member country to collate and maintain that sort of information?
Traceability is a really interesting and hot topic at the moment, Rishi. So, and it has two components to it. There's the welfare component, but there's also the biosecurity component. So with biosecurity, that does, of course, relate to welfare. But in a lot of countries, and particularly here in Australia, biosecurity relates to disease. Prevention of disease, being able to trace horses if there is an outbreak of disease, and obviously that is in their best health interests and therefore its welfare. But if you look across the entire life of a horse, why traceability is really important to me, and I believe to racing, is that we need to know where our horses are. We need to get a proper picture of where our horses are ending up. It helps us identify gaps. It helps us identify all sorts of lifetime experiences of the horse and how we can structure our programs to help support horses so that if they're falling into a safety net scenario, as Di mentioned, we're able to provide the proper incentives to overcome those potential risks that the horse will be at. So traceability is imperative for us if we're going to provide proper care for our horses. But equally, I think it's also important, Rishi, that if we have good traceability data, it enables us as a sport to be able to speak positively, comfortably, and very assertively about our sport, what we are doing, and the provisions we're providing our horses.
It's funny, Jamie, I've spoken to a few people about traceability and welfare, and I've said to them, it's a little bit like a child, having a child. You want to know where they are all the time. And the reason why is because it shows that you genuinely care. And if we as a sport, I think, show that we genuinely care because we're in complete knowledge all the time of where and what these horses are doing, then surely that is a great advert for the fact that we do care. We genuinely care about these horses.
Oh, certainly, Rishi, and I think also, if you bring it back to the minimum standards again, you talk about providing horses good welfare. So it enables you, if you're aware of where the horses are, you're able to address the scenarios to ensure all our horses are getting the proper care. You look at the 5 domains of Professor Mellor, nutrition, environment, health, behaviour and mental and affective state. But interestingly now, and this is the point I think you're sort of leading towards, is the conversation starting to shift towards attitudinal change, behavioural change, not of the horse, but of the people who are their carers and their providers. And as these standards are set at the moment, they're a work in progress. And I would envisage that in the not too distant future, you'll see them reviewed and expanded. And I think it'll progress down that behavioural change of the people and the attitudinal change of the sport and everyone associated with the horse.
Absolutely right. Di, what about the British aftercare landscape and how has that developed over the past number of years? Might you be able to offer us any metrics perhaps to illustrate how that has grown?
Yes, absolutely. But just to follow on from Jamie's point about traceability, Rishi, it's the first stage is so important when it comes to aftercare that we know where that horse is, because simply you can offer help and advice to that person that's taken that horse on, because it's possible that person wakes up the next morning having got this new lovely thoroughbred horse and says, gosh, how do I feed this horse? How do I look after this horse? The same as perhaps you have a puppy or any other animal, but this is the same with a racehorse. And if we have that information, we have a lot of regional, we have a community of volunteers and workers out there that can help these people. So in a very practical way, that's how traceability would help the aftercare side. Going on, yes, the metrics. Well, I mentioned just before we came on air about these dressage competitions at Blenheim that happened in the last few days, this beautiful setting in the countryside here. And I remember when we first started, nobody was really doing dressage on their horse. Now we have over 4,000, more actually, that took part in steeplechases in 2019 and now competing in dressage. So that's 4,000 in 29 taking part in dressage. And showing is huge. Again, from, building it from those very early days, it's about contacts within the industry and within the equestrian world to try and build this program and to make the thoroughbred fashionable. When ROR started, as Jamie will remember, that racehorses might have been taken on by professionals and used and got to probably a high level, but they weren't popular with the equestrian world. And having seen one of the very good equestrian trainers at Blenheim this week, he said that actually retraining of racehorses had changed the program in the equestrian world. It was revolutionary. And that, I think, is because the professionals helped us in those early days make them popular. So now we have a market and people wanting horses. There's nearly 10,000 on the book. So it's a module that has worked for us in this country, and it should be accessible to lots of other countries who are starting it. But, and I'm sure you're going to touch on IFHA in a minute, but it's very much part of that program too.
It's so reassuring to hear the success of the retraining of racehorses and how the numbers have increased, as you said. It certainly gives encouragement for the future. Jamie, just going back to Racing Victoria and the Equine Welfare Strategic Plan, I think that was unveiled in October 2019. How do you think efforts have progressed to implement the pillars, the really important pillars that were laid out in that document?
I think we've made good inroads. Clearly, there's more to be done. There will always be more to be done. But we've looked at the whole life cycle, as I've said, of the horse, and through that, we think that we're trying to educate people that everything they do, right from the time that they decide to breed, to the foaling down, to the weaning, to the breaking in, or the education, the pre-training, then into the racing phase, how the horse is handled during its racing phase, all that shapes what happens for the horse post-racing. And we're doing a lot of work currently trying to incentivise people to make sure they retire a horse that's in the best position it can be for a second career. So we take the view that racing is if you like, the first career of a horse. Post-racing is the second career. So we're working with the breeders currently to try and see what improvements can be made. And at an international level, we're also working with the International Stud Book to see what welfare standards may be able to be put in place. We've introduced a lot of programs here in Victoria, all geared towards assisting and incentivising trainers to use the best diagnostic tools available to them to ensure their horse receives the best treatment during its training career and its racing career. We're also investing a lot in research during the racing career, things such as stride length and many other matters that will help inform us to more early recognise the potential onset of lameness and the cause of lameness. All that's geared towards providing a second career for the horse post-racing. And again, we've launched there an off-the-track program or a platform, if you like, where people are now registering their horses. And that's been hugely successful, where we're incentivising people not just at that first transfer out of racing, because that's covered by the rules of racing here. People must notify us where the horse goes its first transfer. But what we've found through the incentives we're offering people to log into the off-the-track community and become part of that is that we're now, when horses are in their teens, we're still getting people identifying with us where their horses are and who they are. So we're getting that picture well beyond the first transfer out of racing, which has been very, very informative. put in place reset programs, and that's looking at the horses that aren't taken up automatically. So we all know you've got a large percentage of horses that will retire off the track that'll be in demand because of, they're nice horses, they're well conformed and they're good movers. Not all horses are so fortunate. So we're looking at engaging with the reset program, where we pay for the horse to be retrained to give it the best chance of having a further career. Those horses will go out and they'll be engaged in therapies, and they're getting positioned with riding for disabled. So we're looking at the equine businesses, and we're providing them grants in order to them use the word, if you like, employ a horse in their work. So there's a lot going on, and we've got our safety net, the same as Di has mentioned, and that safety net also includes an on-site humane euthanasia program where we incentivise people, where euthanasia, I beg your pardon, is the best outcome for the horse, that be done on site. So that's done in a peaceful, calm environment. It's done by an approved veterinarian. The whole process needs to be pre-approved by Racing Victoria. And again, that helps inform us, and we're able to be right across that unfortunate but at times necessary part of a horse's life.
Jamie, thank you for that. Di, you preempted one of my questions because obviously, as mentioned earlier on, you are the chair of the International Forum for the Aftercare of Horses, IFHA, an independent forum which was established to advocate the lifetime care of retired racehorses, increase awareness within the international racing community of this responsibility. So perhaps you could share the group's mission, its current work, and what you think the vision is for the future.
Well, its mission is to share best practice between aftercare organisations, and we've just been listening to Jamie talk about what he's doing in Australia, and they're ahead of us in so many ways than we are in this country. So again, we're learning from Australia, and again, that's what this is about. IFHA is about the forum for discussion, improving best practice, and getting out to all the racing jurisdictions around the world to try and encourage them to have some sort of aftercare program in place. And to help us do that, the group has put together an aftercare toolkit, which is about lifetime management, transitioning strategies, a safety net, equine therapy and community engagement, thoroughbred advocacy and networking. And this is what the group is about. We went to Japan in those earlier days, and they've got a wonderful program in place now. And again, have been engaged with South Korea and recently Malaysia. So we're working with the Europe racing jurisdictions as well. France have come on hugely in the last few years. So we are all working together to help each other.
Indeed. And Di, I know we've spoken a lot about aftercare and traceability so far, but in your opinion, for the industry as a whole, why do you think investment in aftercare is so vital for racing's overall success and sustainability?
It's absolutely vital because we have seen, recently in a number of countries that there's been some unfortunate media viewing, and a lot of people, you question, a lot of people ask, and we're all associated with that. Whatever happens in Australia or anywhere around the world, whatever we are watching reflects on us all, and that's what we have to be aware of. So we must all do more to help that and work together and show that racing cares. It's non-negotiable. Aftercare is non-negotiable in my mind right now. Things have changed so rapidly in the last few years, and people expect that. The question that's been asked here all the time at the moment, particularly recently, is, well, what happens when they finish racing? The average person watching racing is saying, what happens? So we have to get that message out, and that's for us all. Otherwise, we won't have a product. We won't have racing in years to come.
Jamie, I don't know what you saw of the media coverage that Di referred to, but I'm guessing what she's saying about when one country is affected negatively by media coverage or elements in the media, elements within life that are anti-racing, for example. It's important for every racing jurisdiction to hold its head up and say, here's our accountability.
Oh, without doubt. And I mean, it's well known we went through a very similar, probably even in many instances, a worse episode back in 2000, towards the end of 2019, with negative publicity and media attention. And yes, you need to be able to hold your head up and say that we acknowledge that this is not good enough when it is not good enough. But in having said that, we're taking these measures to address it, and that's what we've endeavoured to do. And that's when we come back to, as I said earlier on, we need to be able to stand up and speak openly and honestly, and robustly, have the discussion robustly with people. But in order to do that, we need to be sure of ourselves and sure of the environment that we're providing our horses, and sure of the whereabouts of those horses, so that we can speak with authority. Because unless you can speak with authority, you won't win the battle. They're well organised, a lot of the animal activists and animal rights groups. We know that. They're well funded, they're well they're well resourced. And so it's racing's responsibility to be able to speak positively and truthfully and openly in relation to it.
I think some of what you've just spoken about might be involved in this question that I have for you, which is about the strategic plan that Racing Victoria invested in post-racing programs to help transition horses to a second career, and why that post-racing phase is so important to the overall equine welfare strategy and the efforts to grow its off-track networks and improve the visibility of racehorses in other disciplines, and why that is so important.
Well, we'd say that each phase of the horse's life is equally important, and the first two phases actually will play a large part in the post-racing career of a horse. But you're right, we've invested heavily and have a very well recognised off-the-track program, not dissimilar, Di, to your ROR. Sponsorship's a big part of what we do in a lot of our programs. I've mentioned previously, the therapy horses and the other riding for disabled horses that we've positioned around. And from a media perspective, we've become very active in getting on the front foot and being proactive in our communication. Last year, during the Spring Carnival, we ran a campaign, Here for the Horse. Everything that was publicised was attached to racing, being here for the horse. This year, the program's being launched, and it's all about equine welfare. There's the message. It doesn't matter whether it's the glitz and the glamour. There's always an equine welfare message in there. So it's showing people at all times, no matter how big the event or how small, equine welfare is at the forefront of everything we do. And we've done some really fundamental things that are not visible to the public, but even in our Racing Victoria board papers, at the end of the paper, you have a table of considerations that you effectively tick off to say you've considered the impacts on the business. Every board paper that within RV now has a box there that equine welfare considerations have been taken into account and any potential implications on equine welfare. So it's just about that consistent messaging. It's about getting the good vision, but also making sure that you're able to speak positively about other aspects that won't necessarily attract the vision that people would like to see.
Indeed. Di, one very visible element of ROR, and indeed there are similar programs in the USA, Australia, and France, is the staging of classes and series exclusively for former racehorses. Why do you think the development of these events is now so central to the overall aftercare mission?
I think because when you have a horse, whether it's a racehorse or another horse, you usually would like to aim at something, to have something to do with your horse. And it could be at any level, in so many different equestrian disciplines, and there are a lot. We have prizes and competitions in 14 different equestrian disciplines. So we cover a huge spectrum, and it's very important, because it might be that you're more of a professional and you're more of an elite rider with a racehorse. It might be that you don't have very much time, you love your horse, you'd like to go hacking on a sort of endurance type ride with these horses. You want to engage with a group that have racehorses as well, to discuss and share your problems or your successes with your horse. It's all about that community engagement.
Well, as a racing fan myself, just hearing what both yourself and Jamie are talking about, it's really encouraging from being on the inside of the sport, knowing that there's so much positive work going on around the world. But I guess what I'm going to finish with is perhaps something that Jamie, you just mentioned, and it's perhaps the key element in equine welfare and perception, and is how do we as a sport educate those beyond the racing industry, reaching the general public about the efforts that are being made within the sport, within horse racing, on behalf of equine safety, equine care. How do we do that, Jamie?
It's a challenge, and I think the starting point is to accept that you won't convert everyone. You need to acknowledge that you won't convert everyone, and then you need to focus on those that you believe you will be able to convert. So it is just about not only through marketing, showing what you're doing, but being able to actually display what you're doing to provide the best welfare for the horse. And there's so many ways that can be done. It can be done through the programs Di's spoken about, the ROR and now off the track here. But one of the big emphasis for us, in our mind at least, is making sure that those more vulnerable horses are receiving the best welfare they can, because the attractive horse, the in-demand horse, they're the ones that they'll usually find a good home because they're going to be well cared for, because they're going to be competitive horses. It's trying to identify those gaps that I mentioned earlier on, where horses find themselves in a vulnerable position, and being able to demonstrate to the public that they're the horses that you're concerned about, and you've put in place mechanisms, programs to assist those horses.
Di, I suspect those words that Jamie just used are never going to be easy, have probably been uttered by yourself as well, yes, when asked the question about how do we educate people who are outside the sport, who perhaps don't understand it, or perhaps just don't think that, or have the perception that horses aren't well cared for.
No, as Jamie said, it's very tough getting that message across, and there's a lot of programs over here using horses for therapy and working with young children, etc., which have been very, very successful. But I think also within our own industry, we can help ourselves a lot more. For instance, the race courses are, I would say, now engaging much more with aftercare in this country, where we have parades, and I know they do the same in other countries too, but they're being paraded by somebody that absolutely adores them and just wants to show that horse off, and and show the general public that this horse has got a lovely home and a home for life. And it's not just about the superstars, because you'd hope they'd be looked after, but it is about those other lesser known horses that they're cared for. The industry is measured by the care of its retired racehorses, and we should remember that.
It's a very important thing to remember, and perhaps sometimes people need reminding that is indeed an excellent barometer to judge the industry. Di Arbuthnot, thank you very much. Jamie Steer, thank you very much. It's been fascinating. And as I've said before during this conversation, as a simple racing fan that I am, it's so reassuring to hear you both talking about the excellent work that is going on around the world, caring for horses through the entire stages of their lives. And long may that continue and get even better in the future. Jamie, Di, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rishi.
Thank you, Rishi.
Hello, everybody. Good day. Thanks to the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities for inviting me to speak with you today about an urgent issue about the future of the planet. Before I begin my talk about sustainability in sports, and in particular how it might affect and is affecting horse racing, I do want to wish you all the best and hope that the way you've handled this past 18 months has been most effective for you and your family. We've all faced difficult times in the past, but this one is unique and none of us have been untouched. So I do hope that this conversation finds you and your loved ones healthy and safe. I'm going to talk with you today about sustainability in sports and in particular concerns about what this means for horse racing. The premise of this conversation is that we need to promote sustainable development. Sustainable development, as many of you know, was a term coined in 1987 by a United Nations Convention on Development and Sustainability. It was called the Brundtland Commission, named after Gro Brundtland, the former Prime Minister of Norway, who chaired that treaty convention. And sustainable development is defined as meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, providing clean air, clean water, a chemically stable atmosphere, the soil processing and natural waste management services that's provided by nature. But right now, we're challenged in maintaining or advancing sustainability. And as a result of human activities, the world is facing a planetary crisis in a variety of ways. We're facing a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, and a toxic pollution crisis. These impacts are causing, frankly, profound suffering, lost lives, lost jobs, rising hunger, declining health, economic damage. You all know about the climate crisis. Recent reports that came out at the end of August and early September from the United Nations on the situation we face with regards to climate indicates that we have already raised the temperature of the planet on average by 1.1 degrees Celsius, which is about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And there's a 100% likelihood that within the next 20 years, we're going to exceed that and go to 1.5 degrees. There's also high probabilities that we may see temperatures rise more than 2 or 3 and up to 4 degrees, which would cause unfathomable catastrophic consequences for humanity. Already, hundreds of thousands of people die each year as a result of the effect of climate change. We're seeing more environmental refugees, we're seeing more floods, more droughts, more fires. Climate crisis is truly an existential crisis, and it's the greatest ecological challenge we face. At the same time, we are wiping out biodiversity at an unprecedented rate. We are experiencing what many scientists call the sixth extinction, the sixth mass extinction. What's different about this mass extinction of plants and animals is that it's being caused by humans. Some estimates indicate that we are wiping out as many as 3 species an hour, every 20 minutes, thousands of species every year. Some estimates indicate that we will wipe out over 1 million species by the end of the century. 98% of all the tigers pre-industrial are gone. Over 90% of all the lions are gone. And of course, it's the little things that keep us alive. And we're causing them very challenging existence circumstances. Toxic pollution. We are literally generating, in the United States, for example, about 12 to 14 billion tons of waste every year. There are trillions of pieces of plastic in the ocean. We are proliferating the world with more and more wastes. If the United States generates a third of all wastes in the world, which is probably a high estimate, then we could estimate that as many as 40 or 45 billion tons of waste are produced globally every year. A lot of those wastes wind up in the ocean. So we're seeing tremendous amounts of ocean pollution, in particular plastics. That's an ecological crisis in the making. The causes of these impacts is rapidly expanding human population, growing consumption, and the technologies we use to produce goods and services. In fact, here's the formula that is fairly easy for you to understand. Environmental impact equals population times consumption times technology. Population is increasing globally about 225 to 250,000 people, new people every day on the planet. That's another New York City's worth of population on the planet every 6 weeks. At the same time, personal and government consumption is increasing by double digits. And technology is still wedded, frankly, overwhelmingly to environmentally ignorant processes, overwhelmingly relying on fossil fuels. So population is increasing, consumption is increasing, and technology is still ecologically outdated. That's why we're facing such an enormous environmental impact, and it shows the challenges of leaving future generations an equal availability of ecological services, a chemically stable atmosphere, clean water, healthy soil. Of course, the big issue that we're all paying attention to, the overarching issue that is causing so much concern, is the climate crisis. And the climate crisis is caused by the accumulation of greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are gases in the Earth's atmosphere that trap heat. The main greenhouse gases are actually water vapor and carbon dioxide. Very, very common chemicals, very, very common molecules. Of course, there are other contributors to greenhouse gases, methane and nitrogen oxides and dust. And we need to get a control over the amount of carbon dioxide that we put into the atmosphere. Right now, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is greater than it has been in over 2 million years. And the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere determines temperature. I just want to remind you that nature is the ultimate source of all economic value. Without clean air, without clean water, without fertile soil, without raw materials found in nature, without the ability of microorganisms to process wastes, no business is possible, no culture is possible. We need to take care of our natural capital, nature's capital, the ecological services that nature provides us. We need to take care of natural capital with the same intensity that we focus on devoting to protect more traditional forms of capital. Right now, sustainability has become increasingly pervasive in business, and it must become standard practice. It's more than just the right thing to do. It is an essential business obligation. As many of you know, more and more companies are developing ESG programs, environment, social, and governance programs, to make sure that they maintain their social license to operate and also to satisfy investors and consumers. They need to respond to public demand. Why do sustainability from a business perspective? It is, of course, being viewed as the right thing to do, but it also offers the opportunity to capture new markets. Electric vehicles, in terms of ecological impact, are better than combustion of fossil fuel vehicles. There's also an opportunity to mitigate business risks. You don't want to be implicated. No business wants to be implicated in wiping out species, wiping out irreplaceable forests, causing damage to communities around the world. Of course, as we know, the most disproportionately burdened subgroup populations are poor people around the world, people of color. No business should be implicated in contributing to these challenging pressures. Properly designed, sustainability should be able to actually add value to your business. In the sports sector, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on, the fact that so many sports organizations have adopted sustainability programs has allowed sponsors and partners to broaden the relationship of their messaging to consumers. Many businesses, textile, fashion industries, technology businesses are innovating, whether it's lighting or vehicles, and they appreciate the opportunity to market those ecologically better products in affiliation with companies, sports organizations, for example, that are also showing environmental responsibility. So properly designed sustainability planning adds value to a business, while it also simultaneously supports the ability of humans and all other life forms to survive and to prosper. Recently, actually, just before the pandemic, the Harvard Business Review, which is increasingly reporting on sustainability trends in business, concluded that corporate boards must tackle questions about sustainability in an urgent manner. If they don't, they'll hear from investors about their lack of action. In order to fulfill obligations as a member of the board, every listed company board director must become sustainability fluent, must understand the ecological pressures, the ecological constraints that your business, your sporting event is now going to have to operate within. Some of you may be familiar with this chart, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This was produced in 2015 by the United Nations and approved by 198 countries. When we talk about sustainable development and providing future generations with an equal availability of ecological services, we break that down more specifically. What do we mean? Eliminating poverty, eliminating hunger, good health. Remember, economic health is dependent on human health. The pandemic has made that eminently clear that economic health is dependent on human health, and human health is dependent on planetary health. In fact, the spread of infectious diseases is likely to grow because of the way we are misusing the environment. Recently, the Harvard School of Public Health and other reputable academic and research organizations has shown direct relationships between the way we mismanage nature and the pandemic and infectious disease threats that humans face. More proliferation of mosquitoes, more that are actually now found at higher elevations. Deforestation contributes to the spread of infectious diseases. Of course, the wildlife trade. So I urge you all to, actually, I keep a copy of this chart on my desk. And whenever I am engaging in a particular initiative regarding a business investment or advice on operations, I check with these sustainable development goals to see which ones I'm advancing and which ones I need to advance. The way to measure, we have to measure our carbon impacts. We measure what matters. And there are protocols regarding the measurement of greenhouse gases. If there's one thing that I would hope that you take away from this conversation today, it's that you need to understand what your greenhouse gas impact is. And you need to identify opportunities to reduce those impacts. I've been doing environmental research since 1978. There are a few things that I think I know, and there's one thing I know for sure, and that is whenever an organization engages in measurement, they invariably find opportunities to improve. The way we measure greenhouse gas impacts, climate impacts, is broken into 3 different categories that are called Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Scope 1 impacts are relatively easy for you to document and manage. Scope 1 impacts are the impacts associated with what you are doing on site and what you own. So if you are using a boiler on site to generate energy, if you have a truck that you use for your business operations, you own those greenhouse gas impacts. Those are Scope 1. Scope 2 impacts relate to the energy you buy over the fence, what you buy from your utility. More and more companies are shifting to buying renewable energy, energy from wind and solar instead of fossil fuel energy. The underlying cause of climate change is our use of fossil fuels. We need to get rid of fossil fuels in most of our production and transportation sectors. Petroleum and gas are such extraordinarily valuable resources. To waste them by burning them up in an automobile is just foolish. They have so many medicinal and pharmaceutical benefits. We need to shift the use of fossil fuels away from combustion. And in fact, the acquisition of fossil fuels, gas fracking, and the acquisition of oils causes enormous hazardous air emissions, water impacts, biodiversity impacts, public health impacts. So fossil fuels are a major problem. So when you buy your energy, encourage your supplier to give you renewable energy that does not emit greenhouse gases. Scope 3 impacts are related to the products that you buy, the textiles that you buy, the chemicals you buy, the plastic products that you buy. These impacts are, in general, outside of your control. They are under the control of your supplier, of your partner, of your vendor. Food impacts. The agricultural sector is a huge greenhouse gas impacting sector. In fact, if the agricultural sector was a country, it would be the 3rd largest generator of greenhouse gases. So communicating to your suppliers that you want environmentally preferable products that have a lower carbon profile, a lower carbon footprint, is really important and is increasingly welcomed. Recently, the famous wonderful tennis star, Roger Federer, announced that because he has 4 young children, he's going to start to ask his sponsors and his partners to pay attention to their climate impacts. Needless to say, the global movement around greenhouse gases being led overwhelmingly by young women and men, but as we know, the most famous climate activist today is a 17-year-old girl, is putting increasing pressure on businesses, on governments, on investors to manage their greenhouse gas impacts. So just pay attention to Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. The goal is to get to net carbon zero, ideally by 2040, no later than 2050, in order for us to reduce the likelihood of worsening climate catastrophes. When you initiate a sustainability program, there are things that you could do to increase the likelihood of its success. We all know that an organization is the shadow of its leadership. The key thing is that leadership must support sustainability programs. The number one reason sustainability programs fail is a lack of commitment by leadership, which leads to a lack of investment in the resources needed to modify operations and procurement. We need to engage employees We need to develop clear goals and metrics, such as saying we want to get to net carbon zero by 2040. And of course, we need effective communication on this. Climate communication is critical in order for people to understand the authentic health and ecological risks that we face. There are many benefits for a sports organization when they engage in what's called greening in terms of ecological progress. We could reduce the amount of waste we produce, which actually can save us money. We could reduce the amount of energy that we use, which can help save us money. We can reuse items. We can recycle, what's called a circular economy. Instead of a linear economy where you buy something, use it, and dispose of it, a circular economy is where you buy something, you use it, and then it gets recycled and repurposed into something else. So it is more circular. Energy efficiency, water conservation, smart transit, ecological transit, healthy food. These are some of the benefits associated with developing a environmental program, a greening program for your business or event. I'm going to now just run through a few examples of what some prominent organizations in sports are doing to advance their environmental responsibility. In 2020, the Yankees became the first North American sports organization to join the United Nations Sport for Climate Action Framework. Right now, over 270 sports organizations, from the International Olympic Committee to the Staples Center to the Barclays Arena to the O2 Arena, have joined the UN Sport for Climate Action Framework. I'm actually on the steering committee of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Sport for Action Framework. What this does is it commits sports organizations to measuring their greenhouse gases, identifying opportunities for reducing their greenhouse gases, encouraging their partners to measure and reduce their greenhouse gases, and to educate their fans, educate their ecosystem of relationships about the need to act on climate. Some examples of sports teams engaging in environmentally smart procurement that lower their costs. And there really are just too many to measure, too many to report on. Right now, every professional sports league in the United States and in Europe has a sustainability program. The International Olympic Committee has produced a spectacular environmental sustainability strategy that goes out to 2030 and beyond. It's one of the most intelligent environmental strategies ever produced, and it is obligates venues that want to bid on the Olympics to implement environmentally intelligent practices. The Orlando Magic, by looking at their energy use, saved almost $750,000 in energy use. The Seattle Mariners saved $500,000. The Staples Center has 178 urinals. Each urinal was consuming 40,000 gallons of water a year. Remember, the Staples Center is in Los Angeles. That's a desert, and they're under a water conservation stricture. So the Staples Center, and they were paying literally almost $30,000 a year for the water that they were acquiring and getting rid of. So they switched to waterless urinals. The Cleveland Indians has reduced their waste management costs by $50,000 annually. And these numbers add up. The Miami Heat, the Portland Trailblazers, again, are saving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars by taking a look at their environmental, their operations to reduce their environmental impacts. Again, every league, the National Hockey League has produced sustainability reports. The National Basketball Association, actually working with them right now to measure the greenhouse gases associated with their All-Star game, their playoffs, their draft, team travel. The National Hockey League, Major League Soccer has sustainability program, the National Football League in the United States, Cricket Australia, Roland Garros, every major tennis slam has sustainability programs. In fact, I worked with Billie Jean King to develop the sustainability program for the U.S. Tennis Association Tennis Championships. We began that program back in 2007 when there were not even one recycling bin on the grounds, and now they recycle and compost over 90% of their waste, and they save money doing that, and most of their energy comes now from renewable energy. In colleges as well, there's a gigantic movement throughout colleges to pay attention to environmental intelligence, environmentally intelligent procurement. These are the future leaders of our society. The American Association for Sustainability in Higher Education, known as ASHE, has literally hundreds and hundreds of members who have committed to measure and reduce their greenhouse gases, to measure and reduce the amount of waste they produce, to measure and reduce the amount of water, and to promote healthier food at their colleges. Basically, what we're trying to do is protect the functional integrity and the functional diversity of what's called the biosphere. The biosphere is planet Earth. The biosphere is a it's the only place in the universe where life has been found. As you know, we have sent satellites and telescopes far into space. In fact, a few years ago, we sent a satellite outside of our solar system. And what are we doing when we do that? We're looking for one thing. We're looking for signs of life. And we have not found signs of life anywhere in the universe except in a very small 10-mile band that around this planet that we call the biosphere. It starts at the surface of the Earth and goes 5 miles up, and it starts at the surface of the ocean and goes 5 miles down. That incredibly small, infinitesimally small, smaller than an eyelash amount of space in the universe is the only place that we have found life on Earth, of life in the universe. And for those of you who are out there listening to this, let me remind you that of all the forms of life, all the millions of forms of life on Earth, we have been expressed as humans, the most influential form of life. And I have no doubt that those of you who are watching this conversation, if all humans were stretched from one end to the other, we would be seeing the front of the line. So we are extraordinarily privileged. Life is the rarest phenomenon in the universe, and we are among the most well-resourced and influential forms of life in the universe. And that imposes obligations on us to take care of the planet that we inhabit. I hope that some of this has been informative for you. I know I'm going to now engage in a question and answer session. This is a general overview of some basic concepts related to sustainability, but I do have to say that we are in an urgent situation. Some scientists have begun referring to the circumstance that we're in as a human extinction event. If temperatures go up, there is right now 100% likelihood that we will go from 1.1 degrees Celsius temperature increase where we are now to a 1.5 degree temperature increase by 2040. There is a more than 50% chance that we will go to 3 or 4 degrees Celsius by 2080, which is about 10 or 11 degrees Fahrenheit. It's just impossible to imagine the catastrophes that will result at that level of temperature increase. Needless to say, none of this is good for horse racing, for horse farms, for farming in general. We already know that many races have been canceled because of heat. Many races and tracks have been damaged because of floods. Many tracks and races are suffering from drought. And of course, many races and tracks are affected by fires all over the world. And these pressures fires, floods, droughts, environmental refugees, the potential for climate-induced wars, which the Pentagon has written, U.S. Pentagon has written about. All of these pressures are increasing. And there is no one single answer to these problems. There's no one single answer to climate change or biodiversity loss. The situation we're in is the result of millions and millions of environmentally ignorant decisions that we've made over a few centuries. And now we need millions of environmentally intelligent decisions, but we don't have a few centuries to get that done. So again, thank you so much for paying attention to this issue. And I wish you continued good health and safety. And I hope that everybody will find a way to incorporate sustainability practices into your operations in the most effective way possible. Thank you very much.
We're pleased to be joined by Alan Hershkowitz, PhD, the Chairman and Founding Director, Sport and Sustainability International. Alan is also Environmental Science Advisor for baseball's New York Yankees. Thank you very much to Alan, who gave a comprehensive presentation on the crossroads of climate, sustainability and sport. We're lucky to actually have some additional time with Alan today for a follow-up. And Alan, I'm going to start by asking you, what are the main hurdles sustainability faces when it comes to acceptance in the public realm for decision makers in horse racing, indeed, or any sport? What is the business case for committing to sustainability, and what might the consequences of inaction be?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rishi, and it's great to see you and great to have this conversation. Once again, it's wonderful to be able to talk about this issue. When we speak about sustainability, it's important to remember that it is not just about climate action. As I mentioned in my talk previously, in 2015, the United Nations brought together 198 countries to agree on a set of sustainable development goals. There are 17 of them. It includes poverty alleviation. It includes eliminating hunger. It includes good health. So when we talk about sustainability, it's not just about climate. And so, for example, one of the most important things I think a sport organization can do right now, certainly members of your organization should do right now, is make sure that the employees at your venues are safe. As we all know, we are still struggling with a global pandemic. Sustainable Development Goal number 3 is good health. As I said in my talk previously, economic health is dependent on human health. And human health, of course, is dependent on planetary health. But planetary health is also dependent on economic health. If we can't make the investments into new technologies, we're not going to work our way through the various ecological crises we face. So I would say that the first thing that your organization members should do is look into the International Well Building Institute's health and safety rating. This is a rating that can help assure your employees, your staff, your attendees, that they are going into facilities that are safer, that are healthy. The New York Yankees was the first sport organization to go through the health and safety rating. Half of all National Basketball Association venues have adopted it. The Dallas Cowboys have adopted it. Royal Albert Hall has adopted it. The Empire State Building. So I think it's really important that, most importantly, we protect our staff and employees from the pandemic and the risks to the pandemic. So I would encourage your members to go to wellcertified.com and look for the health and safety rating and get information about that. That is part and fundamental to sustainability. Also, to the bigger picture of your question, we have to remember that we subsidize environmentally ignorant activities. We subsidize fossil fuel production. We subsidize unsustainable activities. about 20 years ago now, the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, came out with a report titled Environmentally Harmful Subsidies. And it documented that almost 4% of the total gross domestic product of the planet is directed towards environmentally harmful subsidies. So the economics are biased against doing the right thing. However, regulators are increasingly looking at how organizations are managing their energy and their climate. Investors don't want to be associated with organizations that are not being sustainability literate or sustainability smart. Of course, fans. So for the future legitimacy, the social license to operate, taking responsibility for your sustainability impacts is fundamental. Also, there is a business case. Energy efficiency saves money.
Well, interestingly enough, you're talking about the business case. Obviously, there's the moral case as well to go with the requirements or the benefits of it. And you also spoke about some of the participants in the sport and the welfare implications, which are really interesting. But what about racing's organisers and perhaps the implications in terms of sponsors and interest?
Right. And, remember, obviously, horse racing is just fundamentally, connected with agricultural sector. The agricultural sector is really getting stressed through climate impacts. We're seeing water scarcity. We're seeing tremendous heat affecting outdoor events and the maintenance of farm animals. We're seeing the proliferation of infectious diseases. So really, look, the thing is, there's no one thing that any racing organization can do that's going to get us out of this situation. Unfortunately, I wish there was, but every little thing matters. What we need to do is have the courage to do small things. Do not be ashamed to do small things. I have to tell you that I am working with some of the most prominent sports organizations in the world talking about their plastic straws. And it's not a difficult thing to do, certainly for looking at what you're buying from an energy perspective, and many of your vendors. The paper industry is looking at its global warming impacts because it has been identified as one of the big generators of global warming pollution. And we have game day programs and media guides and concession napkins and bathroom tissue. And more sports organizations are now actually going to digital ticketing. Obviously, a lot of that is also being driven by the COVID. Right now, there are no such things as tickets to baseball games in a physical sense. It's all done online. So every little thing is an opportunity. Don't be afraid to do small things because, as Mother Teresa said, there's no great things, only small things with great love. So do a lot of small things, it adds up. And given the cultural and market influence of your members, if they are asking for renewable energy, if they're asking for environmentally preferable paper products, if they're asking for bio-based plastics, that sends a non-political market message to the culture of the marketplace about where it needs to go. Vendors want to respond to consumer demand. And if consumers are demanding environmentally preferable products, that is an important message for the market to get. To your point about ethics, yeah, it is the right thing to do, but it's no longer only the right thing to do. It's now, as the Harvard Business Review indicated, it's now a new corporate management obligation.
Well, it's really interesting to hear you say taking small steps, because I imagine for a sport such as horse racing, which is essentially in the formative stages of tackling this global issue, the regulators, administrators, participants, they would probably find it easier to take small steps. So when I ask you the question of what do you think are the best ways to begin to address the challenge of climate change, and just hearing you say the word small steps means I think there's some encouragement there. So perhaps you could enlighten us on where we ought to start.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, as I said, measure. You can't identify progress unless you have a baseline from which you are measuring progress. So obviously, the first thing to do is know what your impacts are now. I advise a lot of businesses and sports organizations, and no one likes surprises. They especially don't like surprises when a group of protesters show up outside of their venue protesting about something that they hadn't even thought about. So first thing is measure. Putting in electric vehicle chargers. You don't have to necessarily have electric vehicle chargers for every vehicle that's showing up at your venue, but putting in some electric vehicle chargers. Right now, the major auto industries worldwide are saying that within the next 10 to 15 years, they're not going to be producing internal combustion engine vehicles anymore. It's all going to be electric. So if we go to electric vehicles that are powered by wind and solar, that would be enormously beneficial. And given some of the locations of your racing events, putting in solar arrays. Now, that's a big thing, actually installing solar. That's not a small thing, but asking your utility to buy renewable energy instead of fossil fuel-based energy, that's an easy thing to do. And every utility, certainly in North America and Europe, has programs to supply energy from more renewable sources. Let your suppliers know that you're looking for environmentally. Many of the food and beverage companies have what they call sustainability menus. Aramark, Levy's, Delaware North, Sodexo, some of the largest food and beverage vendors in the world have sustainability menus. They don't want to be caught supplying illegally sourced fish. They don't want to be caught supplying paper products from ecologically irreplaceable forests. There's branding liabilities associated with doing it wrong, and there's branding enhancement associated with doing it right. And many of the sponsors and advertisers want to be affiliated with companies that have better environmental reputations.
Of course, you've given us a couple of examples there, because the thing I was going to ask was types of measurables and reporting. What are the types of measurables and reporting that you think racing countries could be contemplating as they develop their sustainability strategy?
Yeah, number one is energy. Measure your energy impacts, measure your energy use. The energy sector is the biggest concern that we have. It is overwhelmingly reliant right now still on fossil fuels, although wind and solar globally is becoming much more cost competitive than fossil fuels. So I would just say measure your energy use first. Then look at how what you buy and what could be avoided. When I started doing this work with sports back in 2004, 2005, every sport organization that I worked with produced annually a media guide. They printed out a media guide about the attributes of their players, their athletes, including horses. And these media guides were 300 and 400 pages each. And there were thousands of them that were printed. Usually they ordered in the range of 2,000 to 3,000 media guides a year. And guess what? Most of these media guides never even got distributed. So they had to take up valuable real estate space at their venue to store these things. And they were paying money to have these things printed. And of course, the paper production impacts were big. So if you can move to digital media, guides, that's a great thing to do. So look to digitize and reduce dematerialization and decarbonization. These are two terms that your members need to understand. Decarbonization, how can we reduce our emissions of carbon through energy, through procurement, the food sector, how we supply food, and also dematerialization. How can we reduce the need to buy physical products that can be supplied digitally?
The next thing I was going to ask you for more real world examples you could share from the sports world where an industry was able to adapt their operations in a meaningful way that you know about.
Yeah. Well, look, if you go into Yankee Stadium's executive offices, if you go into the Red Sox, okay, the Yankees and the Red Sox have a rivalry here in North America. Guess
Even
what?
I've heard of that.
They're not giving out individual plastic water bottles to their staff anymore. They have water fountains, and they are giving their staff refillable and branded water bottles that they're asking people, or a mug. And it is interesting because I'm not going to name the league, but they redid their offices. They put together a beautiful kitchen and pantry. They had mugs and they had water filters, and yet they still had plastic water bottles. And we discovered that they were spending $75,000 a month. They had their beverage vendor was giving them free water bottles. Well, but the amount of real estate that they would, this is in New York City, where it was then, not now, but then, almost $200 a square foot for real estate space. They were literally taking up a few hundred square feet just to store water bottles, even though they had water fountains in a beautiful kitchen with refillable bottles and cups and mugs. And we realized, boy, that didn't make sense. So we got rid of the water bottles, and they were able to use that real estate space for staff purposes.
Wow. Interesting a point you made earlier on about racing being agricultural. Obviously, through the race courses, training yards, and breeding farms, racing does have a unique dynamic that's different to most sports. So with that in mind, how might the industry calibrate the sporting and agriculture sustainability needs?
Right. Well, look, when we use petroleum-based fertilizers, when we use petroleum-based, fossil fuel-based chemicals to maintain our race courses, or our soccer pitches, or our football pitches, that is contributing to greenhouse gases. It's contributing to chemical pollution. It's contributing to risks where those chemicals are produced to the communities, which are often low-income communities, disproportionately burdened. So as much as possible, shift to organic, shift to local. If you're supplying food, look for locally sourced food. Locally sourced generally means within a 250 mile, maybe 500-kilometer radius. And by supporting local farmers, you're helping to support the local economy. And often small-scale local farmers are not using as much chemicals as some of these giant, agribusiness farms that import food from far away.
Well, and I think one of the things that needs to take time, that will take time, and needs to happen, obviously, is changing the way people think. And with that in mind, what might be some real-world, easier first steps and consideration for anyone trying to improve sustainability?
Right, you're absolutely right. The single most important thing that we can do to promote sustainability is to change cultural attitudes, to change cultural expectations about how we relate to the planet. How should we relate to the ecosystems that give us water to drink? How should we relate to the ecosystems that give us air to breathe? We're treating the atmosphere like a sewer. We pump over 120 million tons of global warming pollution into the atmosphere every day. And actually tomorrow, we're going to pump more into the atmosphere than we are today, because we're still moving in the wrong direction globally in terms of emissions, despite what we know. So, cultural attitudes. This is why your organization having a conversation about this issue is so important. Being affiliated with thoroughbred horse racing, I mean, I've been to races. It is exhilarating. It feels great to be affiliated with the members of your organization. It feels great to go to your events. I feel privileged to go to your events. And if I see a sign that says, we are measuring our greenhouse gases, or I see a health and safety seal that we are, making sure that, this is a certified safer venue, or we are supplying organic food.
Well, I think you've made a number of excellent points, but the fact is that ethics and business can work in harmony, certainly in this respect. And the last point you made about how we should relate ourselves to the planet that we need. And of course, the planet needs us as well. And just doing that and being able to think about it, pause, think about that question is really vital to every single person, whatever the industry. So Alan Hershkowitz, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you so much for the time and thoughts. Some great advice on climate change and sustainability from someone who is extremely passionate about it. And hopefully some of that passion will rub off on as many people as possible. Alan Hershkowitz, thank you so much for your time. And I hope that a lot of people derive a great deal of benefit from this conversation.
Well, thank you very much for having this conversation. It really is an honor to speak to your members, and it's really important. So thank you for picking up this issue.
Dear Louis, it's with deep admiration and respect that I pay tribute to you and everything that you have done for our sport over the past 27 years as chairman of the Federation. You should be truly proud of what you have achieved over this period. You have led the Federation with passion and with vision. You have always respected the history and traditions of racing and also looked forward to the changes needed to secure the future. Two subjects in particular have been constant themes of your leadership: your efforts to drive prohibited substance-free racing and your vision that racing must become truly international. There's no one who can emulate your contribution to the Federation. As the incoming chairman, I want to say that it's a privilege to follow in your footsteps and to have the opportunity to build upon the remarkable legacy that you leave. Dear Louis, it's an honor to be your colleague and your friend.
Louis Romanet started with Société d'Encouragement, the ancestor of France Gallo, in 1968. So it's been many, many years that he has been serving with tremendous dedication French racing. I got the honor and the privilege to be elected in 2003, and I learned a lot from him. He was managing director at the time of France Gallo. It was wonderful to work with him. We changed the distance of the French Derby. He was the most loyal and most efficient, most likable friend and supporter, and I enjoyed tremendously working with him during all those years.
I would like to express my sincere respect and gratitude to you for your great contribution to the development of global racing for a very long time as the chairman of the IFHA. Words cannot express the Romanet family's contribution to racing, and Japanese racing has also been benefited from your support in the international development of our racing and breeding, especially the promotion to a Part 1 country in 2007. You were awarded the Order of Rising Sun by His Majesty the Japanese Emperor in 2010, proving what a great achievement you have done for Japanese racing. We all have much to learn from your strong conviction and passion to promote drug-free, open, high-quality racing on a global scale, and to continue to pursue horse racing as it should be. We will miss you, but I really hope you enjoy your retirement and will continue to support us in your honorary position at the IFHA. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Romanet.
Louis, on behalf of the Jockey Club of the United States, congratulations on your retirement as chairman of the IFHA. It's been my pleasure to serve as one of your vice chairmen over the past decade, and I have marveled at how you have so successfully led this diverse but dedicated group and kept it always moving forward to improve the global sport. From America, we specifically thank you for your tireless support of drug-free racing. Your words of encouragement on this issue at the 2009 Roundtable Conference still resonate, and in fact, inspired us to take up that challenge, leading to the passage of the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act of 2020. Louis, your mark on our sport is indelible. Thanks for all your leadership and friendship. Here's to you.
Well, what do you say about Louis Romanet in a short few words? But I'd just like to pay tribute to Louis and congratulate him on everything he's done for world racing. It's been a privilege to work alongside him over the last number of years. It's remarkable to think that he's retiring now after 9 terms as chairman of the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities. Working with Louis, I always knew he wanted to do the right thing for racing, first for French racing and most recently for international racing, and usually he did that, and he's had a great influence on world racing. The Romanet name is synonymous with all that's good in our sport throughout the world, and I'd just like to wish you, Louis, all the very best on your retirement and look forward to seeing you many times in the future.
Louis, as chairman of the IFHA since its inception in 1994, your name has been synonymous with IFHA and the IFHA with you. You have played a key leadership role in racing's massive global development across 3 decades. Louis, you and your family have dedicated yourselves to French and global thoroughbred racing in an unparalleled fashion over the last century. Your particular achievements include your commitment to drug-free racing, your support for the international pattern and harmonized global rules, and widening of the IFHA's membership. These, amongst others, will form part of your great legacy, Louis. Louis, l'Australie vous remercie énormément pour votre excellent leadership de notre sport. Vous allez beaucoup nous manquer. J'espère bien vous revoir très bientôt.